I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyourear for details. Well, welcome to another Word in Your Ear. And you may know my guests this week individually as a comedian and a best-selling historian, or you may be familiar with them via YouTube and various media where they can be seen on Second World War battlefields, attempting to make a cup of tea using the tea-making technology that was available at the time of the Second World War. Or you may be familiar with them via their podcast, We Have Ways, and the associated festival, which takes place, I think, every year with a kind of khaki Glastonbury, of which more later. But we're here to talk primarily about this new book, Victory 45, the end of the war in 8 surrenders, which is obviously timed to coincide with the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Welcome, Al Murray and James Holland, gentlemen.
Oh, thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Where are you, James? You're down in Wiltshire, which is your normal stamping ground.
Yeah, I've been away a lot the last couple of weeks, but I'm actually on a rare day at home, and the sun is shining, and all is well with the world.
And where are you, Al?
I'm in Bristol because the night before last I was in Barnstaple. Then I was in Weymouth last night. I'm in Carmarthen tonight, and Bristol sort of averages out as the middle.
Right. So you're on tour. Do you still do that thing, Al, where you post pictures of you attempting to jam the kettle under various unsuitable dressing rooms in the taps?
No, not anymore, because basically it had reached the point of sort of repetition, and the joke wasn't becoming funny again with the sort of fourth attempt to get a kettle under the sink in Dorking or wherever.
Well, it made me laugh.
That's very sweet. No, I don't do that anymore. I've sort of I mean, I spend all my time basically trying to make a brew, as you alluded, yes. either in a sort of
windswept.
James.
Yes.
The thing is, I now do that every time I'm in a hotel room, and I don't necessarily take a photo of it, but I share your frustration out. Right. I have to say.
Well, look, enough of the war for a moment. We'll come back to the war. Let's first of all talk about the important things. Can you remember the first pop records you bought when you were kids? James, you go first. Can you remember?
Yeah, it was Magical Mystery Tour. I've heard it. It was a cassette, and I hired it out of the of Salisbury Library. But thereafter, I was purely vinyl. And I have to say, by the age of 9, I had, certainly before John Lennon was murdered, I had every single one of the Beatles albums, and I was absolutely obsessed.
Oh, really? Early on, even before John Lennon was killed?
Yeah. I mean, I spent the whole day, I was at a prep school in Salisbury, a boarding school, and I spent most of the day in the bogs with the door locked, listening to the radio on the day.
So you're one of those people who caught up with the Beatles after they'd ceased trading, so to speak. Did you go and read the biographies and things like that?
Oh, God, yeah. Was it Norman Davis? No, not Norman Davis.
Hunter Davis.
Hunter Davis, Shout. I had lots of books. There was an amazing book in the Salisbury Library called The Mersey Beat, which was a newspaper that they used to produce in Liverpool, and they kind of created a book out of all the different editions, and it was lots of sort of pictures of the Beatles in their kind of in their little Beatles boots on sort of wrecked out, war damaged sort of backyards in Liverpool and stuff, looking very kind of fresh faced and everything, and sort of pictures of them in the Cavern Club. It was all incredibly intoxicating. And then actually the Christmas of 1978, which is just when I sort of started to really get into it, they showed all the Beatles films on television. So I watched Magical Mystery Tour and A Hard Day's Night and Help Yellow Submarine, and even Let It Be. They showed all of them. It took me years afterwards to see them again because, of course, there was no digital platform, and you couldn't even buy them on Betamax, let alone kind of VHS. So you just had to wait for them to turn up on television. But I was totally obsessed. I still am, if I'm brutally honest. I mean, I've got John and Paul, A Love Story, and songs kind of waiting to go. And as we were just discussing, I'm pretty horrified by the idea of the films. I mean, what's the point?
Well, the thing about the Beatles is nowadays you can kind of live in the Beatles world more easily nowadays than you could back when they were a going concern.
Well, this is what's really interesting, isn't it? It's because they did sort of disappear, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Stopped. It ended. The Beatles were done, weren't they? And I remember a thing about the Ruttles, where George Harrison, said to Neil Innes, "How have you seen all this stuff to parody? Where and I don't remember this. I don't remember. First of all, it's clips of bits of things that Innes had and Eric Idle had parodied directly, and George Harrison couldn't work out how they'd done it because it had all disappeared. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there was a sort of pop disposability to them that's been completely reversed, isn't there?
Absolutely.
They've become an item of permanence. It's funny. I was talking to Stephen Wilson the other day, who's that sort of prog guy. We were talking about who survives, who's still around in terms of cultural footprint. And he's very interesting because he said, well, kind of the Beatles still, because, he as well as doing his own thing, he remixes pop music a lot and all this sort of stuff. So the Beatles are kind of still there, but they feel like they're fading. No one knows any Stones music anymore, is what he was saying. He said, the kids,
it's true.
Stones
Isn't
have
that
gone.
interesting?
He said, Stones have gone, and if they survive at all, it's, people not tucking their shirts in rock bands, and that's about it. Right.
Well,
that's absolutely amazing.
But also the Rolling Stones, they've
Beatles.
Stopped playing Brown Sugar, haven't they? Things like that. So the Rolling Stones have kind of started censoring themselves, which
that's ridiculous.
It seems rather beside the point. No, it's funny you should say about the Beatles stuff. The clip to go and find on YouTube is when Tony Wilson, the late Tony Wilson, Factory Records and so forth, he was at Granada in 1976 when George Harrison went up to promote some album. And he said, I've got a bit of old film of your life, the Beatles doing This Boy on Granada, People and Places, or whatever it was. And he takes him in the edit suite and he plays him it. And they just film George Harrison looking at himself 10 years earlier. And he's he's never seen it before. He is kind of touched, embarrassed, his eyes slightly moistened. It's an extraordinary thing to see. And
I'd love to see that.
It's on YouTube, and it gives you an illustration of just how, as we said, that stuff disappeared for years. It was whereas nowadays it's easy to click and you can stream it.
Yeah. I've got to say, David, actually, I was literally 2 days ago, I was telling someone the story that I read in your book about Abbey Road. An absolutely fantastic account of the history of Abbey Road, which I'm a massive fan of the cornet player coming in and playing Penny Lane.
The piccolo trumpet.
Doing a second take, and he just goes, no, I've done it perfectly.
That's my lot, mate.
Yeah, just amazing.
Because the rock and roll attitude is always, we do it better next time. We've got to warm up. No, if you're a classical player, you don't warm up. You do it once, first time, So, Al, what was your first record?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, Jim, talking about the day John Lennon died, because the record I remember being most, my father was very sort of not interested in pop music, and so we kind of lived under this sort of austere cloud. There's a lot of Handel and so Matthew Passion played very loudly on a record player at Easter and all sort of stuff, right? So putting a pop, getting needle time, stylus time at home, and putting a pop record on was quite tricky. But they did have a few in their record collection. And Abbey Road, for instance, they had a copy of that. And so that I come in at the Beatles from the wrong end, from when they're finishing. And it's funny, Jim, you talking about when Lennon was murdered, because I was off sick. I was at home because I boarded as well, inevitably. I was off sick and I was at home, And the news broke and said, and this is so peculiar. My dad didn't go into work, right? He sat at the desk or on the dining room table with all his, got on with it, put Abbey Road on really loudly. And I was suddenly exposed to this. And he's going, poor John Lennon. And I'm thinking, what? Who are you? I don't know who my father is anymore.
Really?
He's a Beatles fan, and one. Exactly.
It's now finally revealed itself.
Yeah, but I the first record I bought was, and then there were 3 by Genesis.
Oh, there you go. That's perfect.
And the reason I bought that was because I felt like, because I was very sort of self-conscious about the kind of pop music I could bring home. I think, well, if I bring home some sort of naughty and bombastic and with clever chords and string sounds on it, Dad won't be able to go, well, this is just crap, and they can't play their instruments and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And also at school, there were a lot of people who were very, very into punk. And I'm not a joiner. I'm not someone who could sort of join the mood. So I thought, well, what's the sort of reciprocal bearing of punk rock in 1979? And it was prog rock. So I got, then there were 3 was my, and again on cassette, because that's how you did it. You would buy things on tape.
Yeah. And did you go?
I've got to say, well, I just, it's really interesting because you're just asking about this. It's prompted a memory. And so where my brother Tom and I lived, we had this, there was the kind of kitchen where you'd have family supper and everything every night. And we'd all sit down and we'd always have a main course, always have a pudding, but it'd be a milk pudding like tapioca or something, with jam on it. And then we go, can we get down, please? And our parents would say yes. And then we go into this separate room, which was called the playroom. And in the playroom, there was a radiogram, because my dad
you've got to have a radiogram
at a local fundraising auction in the neighbouring village in 1977, and that was the start of it. And it could play 78s, 45s, and 33s.
Ooh.
And it had a radio, and it had in front of the, so it was freaking huge. I mean, it must have been kind of 3 foot, 4 foot off the ground, and similar kind of length. And it had the a sort of trough where the record player was, the turntable was. Then it had the radio, which did have a valve, and you had to turn it up, and it had, Luxembourg written on it, in Paris and Berlin and all this kind of stuff.
Hilversum.
Yes.
Hilversum.
And all that. And it had the, you could hear it whir and kind of into life and stuff. And then it had like a pocket for your albums, and you could probably get kind of 15 albums in there. And that, actually, now I think about it, was probably what started it all off, because we used to just go and listen to Beatles records. We just sit around. I mean, it's amazing that you'd think that was just really, really good entertainment, but we weren't really doing it. We just I'd flick through my kind of book on the kind of Mersey beat and listen to kind of, with the Beatles. It was just...
Yeah. Well, it's extraordinary how many people did it. It did it.
Yeah.
So let's just talk a bit about the book. Where did it start? Obviously, because they say wars are easy to start and very difficult to finish. Yes. Have many people written about the finish of wars in the past with this kind of focus?
Well, I mean, there are volumes around, but what basically, it was a light bulb moment I had last summer where I thought, well, because I wrote a book last year about the Battle of Arnhem called Arnhem Black Tuesday, which I
have to say, David, was I think the best-selling military or Second World War, the best-selling history book in the UK in 2024, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think certainly Second World War history. I don't know because
it was a huge bestseller. It did very well. It did very well. But the sort of key part to it, David, it was also I'm in the entertainment business. It was cynically timed for an 80th anniversary. Let's face it. It was the 80th anniversary of the battle last year, and I tried to write a sort of a different way of conceptualizing it, thinking about it differently. And whether that worked or not is up to other people to say. But the point is, I thought, and my publisher was kind of like, "This is great, but you've got to deliver that a little bit earlier if you're going to try and meet an anniversary, for God's sake," and all that sort of thing, right? And I'm saying it's my first rodeo as a proper historian, so all that, right? But basically, last summer I had this light bulb. Hang on a minute.
once I delivered this thing, there's this 80th anniversary next year of the end of the war. That's pretty significant. But also, the interesting thing about the end of the war is it ends several times, and there isn't it sort of stutters. And the reason it stutters is because of the people and the characters and the circumstances. And while, if the history degree I did was all about history is tectonic plates, and the individuals are mere froth atop the wave of events, all this sort of stuff. But actually, when you burrow into it, the personalities involved in what's happening right at the end of the war are critical to the way it plays out. Even when you do have, the tectonic plates of the British Empire, the United States, the three imperiums, and the USSR absolutely crushing their enemies, like, steamrolling them into oblivion. Even then, the Germans in the middle of it going, well, actually, I think you'll find we've tried terribly hard in this difficult set of circumstances. Thanks very much.
And also going, by the way, here's your paycheck.
Yeah,
teenage soldiers.
Yes, there's still exactly. You can still invoice if you're a German infantryman, 15-year-old infantryman. Right at the end of the war, they still get your paybook out, laddie, and here are your rice marks. It's absolutely incredible. They're still sending out. The postman will still come and find you. And hand you your papers 3 weeks before the end of the Second World War in Germany. It's extraordinary. Anyway, but the point is, I thought, well, hang on a minute. And there's a couple, there was one in Surrender in particular I sort of knew my way around and I really wanted to write about, which is the Montgomery one at Luneburg Heath. And I said to Jim, well, what about a book with these, I totted them up as 6. And once we'd embarked upon the project, James said, actually, there's 8, Right. I thought, well, there's 8 surrenders.
Hang on a minute, there's another one.
There's another one. Oh, yeah, there's another one. There's another one. Oh, there's that one. There's that one in Bavaria, isn't there? Whatever. It's like this sort of. And I'd picked 6 really for the alliteration because, as I said, I'm in the entertainment business. But we ended up with this rolling, changing thing from this initial idea. And what was lovely is our publisher, our mutual publisher, said, "This sounds like a great idea. Crack on and write it." And then It's the ocean liner once you've broken the champagne on the bow. It's coming down. It's going to go down the slipway and into the water, and there's nothing you can do about it. So we had to write the book, not in a tremendous hurry, but quickly, and that was good fun too because James
great fun.
James writes these incredible epic, things that cover vast broad sweep, and it was actually interesting having worked with Joe so much, seeing him write about go into sort of not a day, but into a period of 3 weeks or something, and write in an essay form as much as anything else.
Yeah,
that's been good fun too.
Yeah. So you say a lot of this is about the personalities involved. Let's just pick a couple of them that personally interest me. I mean, you mentioned Montgomery, so you read the story about Montgomery, you think, what an eccentric character. What a person. How anybody so lacking in people's skills could rise to the position of eminence. What fascinates you? Is it you, Al, about Montgomery?
I
know. I've been brought over.
But I've sort of dragged Jim by the nose into the pro Monty camp. The thing is of course he's going to be a divisive figure because he ends up he's the most powerful general, field marshal the British Army's ever had, the British have ever had. So a warlord in some respects. So of course he trod on people's toes. So there's sort of lots of grudges lurking, that sort of thing. But I think that such a peculiar fellow ends up in such a position, I think speaks volumes about the British society at the time, the institutions involved, their ability to cope with different kinds of people, all this sort of thing. And that he's a really good exemplar of the way people cope with their emotions back then. They would button them up, and the reason they would button them up was they knew how powerful they were. The guy lost Montgomery was widowed in, or is it widowed when you're a man? I can't remember. I'm not sure. His wife died of a very peculiar thing in the 30s where she was bitten by an insect and her leg went septic and they amputated it. And then she was killed by, septicemia or whatever. And after that, he had no emotional attachments after that. Because he'd been incredibly happy and he shut himself down and dedicated himself to his work. And what's I think interesting about that is because he's a controversial figure, that's painted as weird rather than, lots of people do that, don't they? In normal life, plenty of people do that. They think, well, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to try love again. I'll throw myself into my work. But because
it's an interesting contrast, isn't it, to nowadays where people kind of get kudos by telling you how they feel about absolutely everything.
Yes.
Which also relates to another person I wanted to ask about, and I don't know who's particularly batting for him, but the person that fascinates me is Harry Truman.
Oh, me too.
James.
Me too.
I mean, certainly given more responsibility than anybody in the history of the world, pretty much, from a standing start. Just tell us.
He's more interesting looked through the prism of what's going on today, I think. So you see this man who is a domestic politician through and through. He's from Independence, Missouri. He's since he meets Roosevelt once before before the election, doesn't see him again until the inauguration.
Now go and wait next door.
Sees him twice between inauguration on 20th of January 1945 and Roosevelt dying on the 12th of April. Suddenly he's president, and he's got this huge responsibility, as you say. He's got the growing threat of a future Cold War and relations with the Russians. He knows nothing about the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. And the decision to use it or not use it, should it come to pass, is going to lie on his shoulders. He's got a post-war settlement to deal with. The problems and issues are absolutely legion. And he didn't want to be vice president in the first place. And he certainly doesn't want to be president. And he does what he does through a profound sense of patriotic and Christian duty.
This is it.
He's an incredibly selfless man. And boy, does he step up to the plate. I mean, he's not without his flaws, and he's not without his mistakes as a president. But at that moment, between 12th of April 1945, when that evening when he becomes president, and the end of the war, and actually I think you can go on and look at the kind of the Marshall Plan as well, which is to a large extent him as well, rather than Marshall. You have to say, what a guy. I mean, what an amazing bloke, and what a sharp contrast in his attitude to the presidency and what that means. And he and Roosevelt are both part of the same thing, which is this profound and deep belief that democracy is best, that global prosperity is best, that low tariffs and free trade are the way forward, and that you help your neighbors. And if you have a trade deficit, it doesn't matter, because ultimately you're going to become the richest nation in the world. And where there's prosperity, there is peace. Conversely, where there is kind of, extreme financial turmoil, that leads to political turmoil, which very often then can lead to a hot war. So, it could not be more relevant right now. Is the truth of the matter. I think he's absolutely amazing.
There's a wonderful quote, I think from an American commander in the final chapter of the book. I think he says, "It's easier to build up your military and act tough.
Jonathan
It's cheaper to act tough than it is to fight a war."
Yeah,
that's what he says. And who says that?
That's Jonathan Wainwright, who is an incredible guy. He is a very competent general. He's a general under MacArthur on the Philippines, and when MacArthur leaves, is ordered out by Roosevelt in March 1942, and leaves the island of Corregidor in the Bay of Manila, and gets whisked off to Australia. Wainwright is left with command of the remaining troops on the Philippines, which basically means he's going to get put in the bag and have to surrender. And, he is the only army commander that surrenders, American army commander that surrenders in the Second World War, which is a terrible burden to have to bear. And he then spends the next few years in various Japanese prison camps, and survives. And again, he's another of these incredibly selfless people who just have a very deep-rooted and profound sense of personal responsibility and duty, which I think is incredibly admirable. And one has to be careful of sort of going, "Oh, those were the days," when people. would sort of stand up for their country and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, it's still, that attitude is definitely worthy of admiration, I would say.
Well, at this point, let's just talk a bit about the other stuff you do that's connected with all this. And on your We Have Ways festival, are you doing that this year? Right. Was it every year? I think I came 2 years ago, and it was at Silverstone, was it? I think it was at Silverstone.
Yes.
And it was
as long as people want it, we will.
It was absolutely astonishing. You know, it's the largest collection of people wearing kind of combat fatigues who wanted to wander around tanks and, you know, listen to people talk about various aspects of the Second World War that I've ever seen. It was absolutely extraordinary. But the thing that struck me on the day I came is that your biggest draw was an actor who had played a German officer in some BBC drama of kind of
Darren Nesbitt.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you that. You're promoting, I'll say, the khaki Glastonbury. Who are your heavy hitters? Who are the people who put bums on seats in that kind of gathering? And who are the people who come? Who's your audience and what attracts them? How does it work?
Well, it came about because the podcast bloomed during the pandemic, like I think many did. And we found this sort of audience who organising itself, and it had formed a club called itself the Independent Company, named after 21st Independent Parachute Company, which is an Arnhem thing. So very often these things tie back to the stuff we were first talking about on the podcast.
Right.
And they organised themselves, and it became clear to us that what would be fun would be some sort of festival or gathering to say thank you to the listeners at the end of when we were finally let out again, demobbed. So there was this, the first one we did, it was in September 2021. And there was very much this sort of demob feeling. There's a lot of people finally meeting, and all these faces and people who've met on chat groups and discords or whatever, all getting together and having a drink, and us getting to put faces to names and all that sort of thing. Great fun. But obviously we also, because Jim runs Chalk History Festival, which is an amazing event, but a bit too broadly focused for my taste, if I'm honest with you. I mean, who cares about the Romans? Not me. It's a long time ago. We can all forget about it, please. Anyway, the point is, if you could pass that message on to your brother, Jim, that'd be wonderful. We thought, well, let's do this again, and it's moved in the diary a couple of times because, so for instance, this year it's the 12th to the 14th of September, and we want to aim for the autumn really, but last year we were on in July because September last year was the anniversary of Operation Market Garden, of the Arnhem Battle. And basically all the blokes, and it's blokes with green vehicles, or antique green vehicles, were going to be in the Netherlands and joining this huge procession that goes up the road through Nijmegen and up to Arnhem. And so in order to have vehicles to display, we were on in July last year. But basically, it's our listeners who skew younger than you'd think, because I thought they'd all be, basically me. I thought we were going to be a field of people like me. But actually, they skew younger than you think, and there are more women than you think. I mean, lots of couples and families.
No, there were fair. No, absolutely.
I know, which may amaze and astound, given the public perception of the subject.
Well, people like a story, don't they? That crosses over with absolutely everything, and it is mainly people telling stories, isn't it? Now, 40 years ago, it would have been people who'd experienced the events telling stories, and now it's historians. Now, what do you make of our national obsession with the Second World War? Does it, James, make us more martial or less so? And this is something definitely coming into focus
I don't know whether
in recent
size of the
days.
armed forces recently, David, but they're much shrunken.
Absolutely.
So I don't think it does. I mean, we were once talking to Robert Harris, the brilliant novelist, and he said, people say to me, why are you so obsessed with the Second World War? And he said, and I always reply, why wouldn't you be obsessed with the Second World War? And amen to that. I mean, I suppose the thing is it is it remains the biggest global conflict the world has ever known. It is filled with unspeakable amounts of human drama. It truly was global. It was fought in the air, on oceans, up rivers, on the ice, in deserts, in jungles, in the hills and the mountains, the fields and the beaches, etc., etc. So,
and on the landing stage.
And the landing stages. And you know, there's something like 35 million people in this country today who directly have immediate family descendants who fought in it. So there is a connection there. And, you know, if anyone's doubting the kind of sort of the moral rightness of the cause, you've only got to look at images of Belsen or go to Auschwitz or something, and you realise kind of, you know, or the prison camps in Japan and elsewhere, and the Thai-Burma Railway, to realise, you know, that we were on the right side. And it's just enduringly and endlessly fascinating. And this is, you know, it's that great line, isn't it, by L.P. Hartley, where he opens the go-between and he says, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. Well, that may be the case, but I can absolutely tell you that the people who fought in the Second World War were just like us. You know, they had the same anxieties, worries, fears, things that made them laugh, things that got them upset. You know, they are very, very identifiable. That, you know, the distance of time hasn't shrunken that. And it's incredibly well documented, you know, through film and camera and photographs and diaries and letters and interviews and so on. So one can get very close to it in a funny sort of way. And you can still go and walk the mountains and walk the deserts and the jungles and all the rest of it and see the traces of this stuff. So it's incredibly compelling. And I do think it's more of a bloke thing than a girl thing. But blokes just like obsessions. You know, and they like hobbies and they like interests. You know, not to say that girls don't, but I just think there is something about the male psyche that says, I've got to become obsessed with something. And if you're going to become obsessed with something, you might as well become obsessed with the Second World War with all its life lessons.
Because there's plenty of it. You know, there's plenty
of it. And it's still very relevant, I think.
And down to the case. But Al, you know, if you take the title of your podcast, We Have Ways, you know, and there is the Second World War also lives on as what you can only describe as popular culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is a kind of odd thing. Does that happen in other countries? You know,
well, I don't know. I think winning it helps you write.
Definitely helps.
You have sitcoms about it. I mean, I think losing it might mean you probably don't make Dad's
But the
Army.
Americans don't do the same thing, do they?
Well, I don't know. They've sort of had flurries of it, and you know the sort of and the sort of I mean, really, it's the Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg.
I suppose.
Call of Duty, Nexus.
And video games. Because after all, I mean, this is the other thing I always, you know, I can't remember who it was in an interview it was Charlie Brooker in an interview the other day said, you know, lots of people play video games, but no one ever asks a politician what his favorite video game is. They'll ask him what football team he supports, but they won't ask him what video game he plays. And actually, everyone plays lots of people play video games more than go to the football. So, like, why are they forgotten about? So video games in the Second World War are like there's always there's one every 9 months, a new one, a new spin on a like, you know, we spoke to someone the other day who's got one where you have to make complicated command decisions and keep the morale of the men in your laptop topped up, and you know, not send them on missions which will damage their morale as well as get them, you know, all this sort of stuff. So there's always something in the ether. But I think our relationship with it is very interesting, because there's the sort of sense that, you know, if you're European, the land war happened there, and it was a ghastly business, no two ways about it. Whereas we sit in this peculiar sort of half in, half out. You know,
we were never conquered. That's the thing. You know?
Exactly. It's our relationship with Europe. You know, one half in, half out. That yes, the Blitz is an appalling event, but finite, and doesn't involve, you know, coal scuttle helmets and jackboots in Parliament Square. So we don't have the relationship, say, the French might have with the Second World War. You know, everyone's got a complicated relationship with it. You look at Russia's relationship with the Second World War, which is absolutely, you could argue has led directly to a lot of what's going on now. Because there is a sort of idea that when are we going to get over it in this country? Well, I think actually the way we view it's fine, really, when you compare it to, say, Russia. When are they going to get over it? Would be a more pertinent question, perhaps.
So, what's next for the two of you with your Second World War, guys?
Well,
what is there any great undiscovered territory of the Second World War that you think hasn't really had a light shone on it?
I tell you what, David. For all the millions of books that have been written about the Second World War, there are still huge gaps, and even the really popular subjects, there's not that many of them. I mean, right now I'm doing some work on the Battle of the Bulge. You'd have thought that's been done to death. It sort of hasn't really, and I think what one is bringing now is less something kind of like super revelatory, and more it's a shift of perspective. And a shift of approach, and that comes in terms of your interpretation of the history of the events that happened, but also in how you tell the story. And I think there is a fourth wall in narrative nonfiction in history books that hasn't quite been worked out yet. And I've certainly one of the things that I know Al is trying to do is sort of, and I am doing exactly the same, is striving to write these books in a less traditional formulaic manner that is more engaging and more compelling than perhaps has been the case before. I mean, there are so many books about the Second World War which I've been reading and have read in the past, where you'd think, oh my God, this is dull as ditch water. And you're thinking that's quite an achievement when you're thinking about the human drama that's involved in which they're writing. So I think that's really where it lies. And from the point of view of us, there's definitely new other books that Al and I will collaborate together on. There's books that we're both doing ourselves on our own. We've got a new website called World War II, www.headquarters.com, which we're really hoping will be a kind of a real hub. And on there, you've got all sorts of podcast episodes and stuff, but there will be more video and film content. There's archive, original documents, because, I'm lucky enough over the last sort of 25 years that I've been gadding around the world interviewing veterans before it was too late, but then also going to archives and getting original documents. And, it just feels wrong somehow to just kind of hoard all that myself. If I've got all this stuff, why don't I share it? The more people that kind of know about it, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So, we're starting to kind of post up PDFs of documents that I've photographed in archives and things, and photographs that we've managed to accrue over the years and things.
Well, I mean, you were talking about this the other day. Jim was in the German archive the other day, which is hard. It sort of doesn't work very well, and there's no German efficiency about their Second World War archive.
No Vorkspon technique.
No, there's no.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And you wonder, I think maybe if I'd lost the Second World War, having started it, my archive would be difficult to access as well. But there we are. But the thing Jim was doing when he was there last month was using Google Translate. He'd take a picture of a document and then fire it off to the satellite, and it would come back translated. And that is an amazing thing that I think is going to change stuff too. Yes. There's a whole set of documentary stuff that basically is now accessible, because back in the day, David Irving, for instance, he was renowned for the fact that he could go in the German archive because his German was so good. It then turned out that he was lying about it all, but fine. You don't need that superpower anymore. Google Translate or whichever, I'm sure other apps are available, has stepped in and made this stuff far more accessible. So I think in the writing of the history, and then in certainly in James's presentation of it, there's going to be that change too. And I think that which isn't necessarily to get their side of the story perhaps, but to get a clearer understanding. Because one of the sort of eternal mysteries, and I think we talk about this a lot in Victory 45. The eternal mystery is, why are they still fighting the Germans in the last 2 years of the war? Why on earth? What's propelling them? What on earth would compel them to carry on, given the fact they have lost? And you know, that you can get into an archive like that now offers glimpses in through the Nacht and Nebel into the mindset of German people. And I think, you know, when you talk about what we've got to come, but what there is, you know, so we've got this website with all this stuff to offer, but I think that's one of the things that's coming, one of the things that's changing. And, you know, that kind of technology is useful, I think is also very exciting, isn't it, Jim?
Yeah, so this war will run and run is basically what you're saying.
David, the first bit of Second World War sort of entertainment I did was 21 years ago. It was a program called Road to Berlin, which I did for the Discovery Channel. And they had me sort of jumping out of airplanes and setting fire to things with flamethrowers. And it was tremendous fun. And then and it was well received. And I went for a lunch with the exec and said, can we do Road to Rome, please? You know, where I go from El Alamein to Rome. Wouldn't that be fun? And she went, Al, I think it's fair to say that the party for the Second World War is over.
Where's she now?
Well, I don't know. She's probably in charge of Netflix. There we are.
Well, look, there's the book, Victory 45, The End of the War in 8 Surrenders, James Holland and Al Murray. Out soon to coincide with the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We normally finish on these things, going back to our pop music focus, by getting people to tell us what is the best record ever made, because obviously we're constantly engaged in a struggle to find what is the best record ever made, and we always feel that somebody's about to tell us. Would you like to volunteer your suggestion, James?
Yeah, I'll go for the Day in the Life.
It's a Day in the Life by the Beatles. Okay, fair enough. What about you, Al?
Side 2 of Abbey Road.
Side 2 of Abbey Road.
Oh, yeah. Side 2 of Abbey Road. I've got to say, if you're allowed to have a whole side, then definitely.
I was looking at an original review.
That medley of songs is just so.
I was looking at an original review of Abbey Road, I think in Rolling Stone, only last week. And all he says about side 2 is a shambles. So there you
brilliant.
go.
It's utterly genius from Mean Mr. Mustard to Polythene Pan to Carry That Weight.
Do you know that Mark Lewison, the great Beatles scholar, has discovered there was a Mean Mr. Mustard? There really was. Oh, yeah. Did you not know this? Did you? Mark Lewison did wonderful kind of live show just about what he's done 2 of them anyway. And he found that I live in North London, and Mr. Mustard lives not far from where I am. Not far from where I am. He was divorced by his wife because he got dressed in the dark and he wouldn't let her put the lights on, and it was all. And John Lennon used to write songs with the copy of the Daily Mail open in front of him. Day in the Life is another example.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Holes in Blackwood and Lancashire. That's what he did. It came straight out of the paper. And so Mean Mr. Mustard was real. So I
love that.
You've told me loads of things. I've told you one thing.
No. Well, I'll trade that anytime.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.